Liberia's aviation scare, President Boakai's near crash at RIA, and the unspoken risks of Africa's aging aviation infrastructure. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where truth meets accountability. Today, we dive into a shocking incident that nearly shook Liberia's leadership. President Joseph Boakai's plane suffered a terrifying tire burst on landing at Roberts International Airport. But this is more than a scare. It's a mirror reflecting Africa's dangerous aviation gaps. Stay with us as we break down what happened, why it matters, and what must change. In a startling development that has raised serious questions about aviation safety and presidential logistics in West Africa, Front Page Africa has reported that President Joseph Boakai of Liberia narrowly escaped a potential aviation disaster at Roberts International Airport, RIA, on Thursday. According to sources cited in the report, one of the private jet's tires burst upon landing, forcing an emergency halt mid-runway. The incident caused brief panic among passengers, although the president and his delegation were unharmed. The incident, what we know so far, President Boakai and his entourage were returning from Nigeria aboard the same private jet that took them on the initial trip. Upon touchdown at RIA, the aircraft's tire reportedly burst, bringing the plane to an abrupt stop in the middle of the runway. Emergency protocol was swiftly activated. The presidential motorcade was mobilized for a rapid evacuation of the president, while the remaining delegation was ferried off by an airport shuttle. As of this publication, the Liberian Civil Aviation Authority and Roberts International Airport officials have not issued a formal statement explaining the cause of the tire malfunction, leaving room for public concern and speculation. Source: Front Page Africa, Liberia. President Boakai's plane suffers scare during landing at RIA, May 2025. Critical analysis: Presidential travel and the fragility of aviation safety in Africa. The incident involving President Boakai serves as a stark reminder of the systemic fragility in aviation infrastructure across much of Africa. While the incident may appear isolated, it touches on several deeper issues. 1. Aging aircraft and questionable maintenance protocols. Across the continent, both commercial and private aircraft fleets suffer from inconsistent maintenance standards. In many cases, private jets used by heads of state are leased or owned through opaque arrangements with questionable maintenance histories. A tire burst on landing, while potentially the result of a manufacturing defect, may also be symptomatic of worn components, overuse, or lapses in pre-flight inspections. In 2003, the plane of then Burundi President Domitien Ndayizeye had to make an emergency landing after a hydraulic failure. Similarly, a 2022 incident involving the president of Malawi's plane being grounded due to engine issues again pointed to lapses in aviation logistics planning. 2. Security risks and national preparedness. The fact that Liberia's president was traveling in a jet that suffered such a malfunction raises broader questions. Was the aircraft properly vetted by aviation experts? Were redundancy plans in place? What protocols exist to ensure head of state transport is of the highest safety standard? The swift response by the presidential security detail is commendable, but the reliance on an airport shuttle to transport high-level government officials after such a scare underscores a lack of contingency planning. Forward-looking approach: what Liberia and Africa must do to prevent future aviation scares, particularly involving national leaders and high-profile passengers. Liberia, and indeed all African countries, must take urgent steps. 1. Establish independent presidential aviation units. Rather than relying on ad hoc or leased private jets, nations should invest in properly maintained, dedicated aircraft operated by independent aviation units with strict safety standards and transparent auditing. 2. Strengthen civil aviation oversight. Regulatory bodies must be empowered and depoliticized to enforce stringent inspections of all aircraft, especially those used by government officials. 3. Regional collaboration on air safety. ECOWAS and the African Union can facilitate regional aviation safety audits, share black box data, and collectively negotiate better terms with aircraft suppliers and leasing companies. 4. Public transparency and accountability. In the wake of such incidents, official investigations must be launched and publicly disclosed. Citizens deserve to know whether their leaders are traveling safely and responsibly. Latest developments. As of Friday, the Liberian presidency has not released any detailed statement on the incident. The lack of transparency is creating growing unease, especially among aviation and security experts. Civil society groups, such as the Center for Transparency and Aviation Safety in Monrovia, are calling for an immediate probe and the publication of maintenance logs for the aircraft in question. Meanwhile, public discourse is brewing over whether Liberia should continue to rely on leased private aircraft for presidential travel, especially without publicly known vetting protocols. Luxury versus safety. The cost of prestige in presidential aviation. One of the lingering concerns across West African democracies is the prioritization of luxury and optics over essential safety in presidential air travel. It is common practice for African heads of state to charter high-end private jets or operate presidential fleets that consume large portions of national budgets, often without corresponding investment in safety assurance, pilot training, or aircraft modernization. Liberia's case in focus. Liberia, still grappling with the economic scars of civil war and the aftershocks of the Ebola crisis and COVID-19 pandemic, remains heavily dependent on donor funding and international support for many public programs. Yet, the incident involving President Boakai's private jet raises pertinent questions. What was the cost of chartering the private aircraft? Was the jet leased from a credible aviation provider with a safety-certified fleet? Was there a competitive procurement process, or was the service arranged informally? Are there detailed public records of the contract and maintenance reports? Until these questions are addressed, public trust remains fragile. Critics argue that taxpayer funds should prioritize national aviation infrastructure, not just elite travel arrangements. Aviation infrastructure deficit in Africa, a structural crisis. President Boakai's near-miss incident is a symptom of a much larger systemic issue: the crumbling aviation infrastructure across many African countries. Even major airports like Roberts International Airport, RIA, Liberia's primary international gateway, have faced periodic criticisms for poor runway conditions, outdated safety equipment, and inadequate emergency response systems. According to the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO's 2023 audit, more than 35% of African airports do not meet Category 1 safety standards. This statistic is alarming, especially when VIP or commercial traffic depends on safe takeoffs and landings. The problem isn't limited to Liberia. Sierra Leone's Lungi International Airport has battled underinvestment and frequent power failures. Nigeria's Murtala Muhammad International Airport, despite being a regional hub, was flagged for aging facilities and lapses in fire safety systems. Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso all have capital airports with limited night navigation systems, minimal radar coverage, and overused runways. This underinvestment increases the risk for all passengers, not just presidents, and stifles regional economic integration, trade, and tourism. Comparative leadership: who's getting it right? Not all African nations are lagging behind in aviation safety. Some provide instructive examples of how to prioritize modern air travel and presidential safety without unnecessary extravagance. Rwanda under President Paul Kagame, Rwanda has invested in both public and VIP aviation infrastructure through strategic partnerships. The Kigali International Airport is among the best in Central East Africa in terms of safety ratings, and Rwanda Air operates a small but efficiently managed fleet with clearly defined protocols for VIP travel. Ghana's Kotoka International Airport has received ICAO certification for meeting key global safety standards. Moreover, the Ghanaian government has streamlined its presidential travel by maintaining a publicly acknowledged government aircraft with regular audits and budgetary oversight from Parliament. These examples show that with political will, transparency, and focused investment, Africa can modernize its aviation systems and make safety, not luxury, the true hallmark of leadership. The role of African regional bodies in aviation reform. The African Union, AU, in partnership with the African Civil Aviation Commission, AFCAC, and AFRA, African Airlines Association, launched the Single African Air Transport Market, SAATM, to liberalize the aviation sector across the continent. Yet implementation remains slow, and safety oversight varies drastically by region. In light of the Liberian scare, it is imperative for regional stakeholders, including ECOWAS, to push for harmonized aviation safety audits, regional safety investigation teams, a shared black box analysis facility, a centralized reporting platform for all state-related aviation incidents. These initiatives would not only enhance transparency and accountability, but also provide a knowledge-sharing mechanism to prevent repeat incidents. Public outrage and social media reaction. Liberians took to social media shortly after news of the incident broke. Many citizens expressed relief that the president and his team were safe, but outrage quickly followed regarding the silence of airport authorities and lack of real-time updates. Critics posted messages such as, "The president almost died, and we're still pretending that our aviation sector is okay?" A Justice for Liberia, Twitter. "We cannot afford to lose another leader in an air crash. Fix the runways, fix the jets, fix the system." Voice of the People, Facebook. The episode has galvanized calls for a national review of all aviation safety standards and a demand for transparent leadership in logistics planning. Behind the jet, who owns Liberia's presidential aircraft? In the wake of the near-tragic landing at Roberts International Airport, RIA, Liberians and international observers alike are demanding answers about the jet that carried President Joseph Boakai and his delegation. While Front Page Africa reported that it was a private jet used both for the president's journey to Nigeria and his return, no official details have been released on the ownership or maintenance history of the aircraft. The black box of procurement preliminary investigations by the Bold African Voice reveal a common pattern. Most African governments, including Liberia, often rely on hastily arranged leases through politically connected middlemen rather than direct contracts with globally certified aviation companies. These deals are rarely scrutinized and often escape public accountability mechanisms. Several insiders at the Ministry of State for Presidential Affairs, speaking under condition of anonymity, suggested the jet may have been leased through an offshore broker with no permanent office in Liberia. If confirmed, this would raise red flags about Liberia's procurement practices, especially for high-security presidential logistics. The real cost of presidential travel in weak economies. In countries like Liberia, where poverty levels are high, infrastructure is weak, and basic services remain underfunded, the cost of presidential travel becomes more than a financial issue. It's an ethical dilemma. According to Liberia's 2024 budget report, over $2.3 million was allocated for state protocol and travel, including aircraft leasing, hotel accommodation, and international conference allowances. Civil society actors argue that such resources should instead strengthen domestic aviation safety infrastructure or support institutions like the Liberia Civil Aviation Authority, LCAA, and Roberts International Airport. This imbalance between elite privilege and public safety fosters resentment and feeds into the larger crisis of trust between governments and citizens in many African states. Lessons from the past. When warnings go. Unheeded Liberia has had its share of tragic aviation history. In 2003, a UN helicopter crashed en route to the interior, killing several aid workers. In 2011, a cargo plane overshot the runway at RIA, leading to fatalities and exposing flaws in runway maintenance and air traffic control protocols. These incidents prompted temporary investigations, but few long-term reforms were implemented. Now, with the president himself at the center of a near disaster, Liberia faces a rare opportunity to address systemic gaps, or risk another cycle of neglect, denial, and disaster. A wake-up call for African leaders. The narrow escape of President Boakai should serve as a loud and urgent alarm across Africa's corridors of power. It is not enough to rely on temporary jets or reactive security measures. True leadership demands long-term investment in national safety systems that serve all citizens, not just the political elite. Key messages. 1. Aviation safety is national security. Heads of state must treat aviation infrastructure with the same urgency as defense or healthcare. 2. Transparency in procurement saves lives. Governments must publicly disclose aviation contracts, maintenance schedules, and compliance audits. 3. Prioritize public safety over presidential luxury. Extravagant VIP travel arrangements in economically struggling countries are not just tone deaf, they are dangerous. 4. Regional cooperation is essential. ECOWAS, the African Union, and AFCAC must fast-track harmonized air safety standards and establish a continent-wide aviation monitoring body. 5. Citizens have a right to accountability. In every aviation-related incident, the public deserves timely, truthful updates and full investigative reports. Advice to African leaders. To the presidents, ministers, and aviation authorities of Africa, do not wait for a fatal crash to realize that your aviation systems are failing. Use this moment, Liberia's close call, to lead boldly, transparently, and responsibly. Adopt a Pan-African standard of safety, invest in people and infrastructure, and remember that your own life is tethered to the very systems you neglect. A safe president means nothing without a safe population. The skies must be secure, not only for those in power, but for every African boarding a flight in hope of reaching their destination alive. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where we challenge silence with truth. If you found this analysis insightful, hit like, drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more hard-hitting African stories. Tap the bell so you never miss a broadcast that dares to speak boldly. Until next time, keep your voice bold, because Africa deserves better.